If everybody's empowered and enabled to know that, hey, let's get something out there sooner than later, we'll iterate on it. You get something out, you pause, you look at some data, you pause and you reflect, and then you move forward. And if everybody's empowered to work in that type of environment, then you don't have any finger pointing. And it's like, hey, we see a problem. Let's not wait to build a huge process around it and systems and tools. And how can we come up with something and iterate on it and then build a process around it and then build a system into it?
You're listening to the Trust Builders podcast, brought to you by Adoreboard.
Welcome to today's Trust Builders. Today on the Trust Builders podcast, so I'll now get rid of the lives now that we've verified we're live. So on today's Trust Builders, really exciting because we get to welcome Bobby Brown, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Nextlane. And a bit of background, Bobby joined Nextlane in April there of 2025. He's currently the Chief Customer Officer and he brings with him 25 years of experience. We're just chatting about the fact that he is Silicon Valley native, having grown up in San Francisco. So we're just chatting about Zappos and the quick exchange there between Alex and Bobby. But Bobby is someone I got to know over the last couple of years. He was a mentor in, I suppose, the world famous VC company, and I had a great mentorship from Bobby. So a real privilege to have you on, Bobby. But Bobby, you're really renowned for your ability to design and scale world-class customer experience and the organizations thinking about those seamless journeys, maximizing retention. That's a big thing that we're going to focus on, linking the CX program to business impact, and then driving product adoption at every touch point. So before joining Nextlane, you were the president of customer experience at Bird, and that's formerly MessageBird, where he built a scalable CX framework supporting everyone from self-serve users to enterprise clients. We're going to start with the idea of frameworks in just a second. But your impact doesn't stop there, Bobby. Twilio, which is this phenomenal global company that we're all aware of, you were instrumental in revamping their global customer success program during that scale up and rapid expansion. And then previously at Google News and GoGrid, certainly about when cloud computing was just at the start. As I said, you're a native of the US, but you're currently in Amsterdam. So you're bringing a European vibe, while Alex, usually in Las Vegas, is elsewhere today in the US. You're going to learn where he is in just a second. So I think it's that blend of Silicon Valley expertise you're going to hear today with a nuanced European flavor to bring some of the best practice experience. So Bobby, you're very welcome today and thank you for taking time.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it. I'm glad to get to connect with you in a different setting. So it's fun.
Exactly. And Alex, you're joining from, tell us where you're joining from today.
Joining from San Diego. We did a brief family trip here, usually, as you said, in Las Vegas. Really excited to talk to you, Bobby, and to learn more about you.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to meet you.
Superb. So today we're going to be focusing on strategies to minimize churn and maximize value. I think, Bobby, if we could maybe just start with the idea of your operating framework, those three kind of vectors or pillars in which you think about customer experience. So maybe if we start there and then think about your 6 guiding principles that we'll chat through.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going through these right now again with my new journey at Nextlane. And as I've done consulting to a number of companies, and every time I join a new company, I always try to bucket everything into people, process, and systems. So pretty straightforward, but every time a challenge comes up or something good happens, I just think about, was this because of the people, process, or systems, right? And so at the end of the day, I think those are the 3 main driving factors when supporting your customers and building out a scalable organization.
Superb. And I suppose we had talked through this idea of principles. So there are the 3 areas: people, process, and thinking about the broader elements. But if we were to maybe just take the first principle around measurement, could you maybe just talk to that idea? Your first principle is, what you're not measuring, you're not managing. a famous Drucker quote, but something that's important as well. So maybe if you just take us through why that should be the cornerstone when we think about these three areas that you just referenced.
Absolutely. I learned that my first job out of school, and it's stuck with me ever since. And everywhere I go, it rings true. And I'd say today it even becomes more true with our data-driven approaches and the amount of data we have, and with AI and even your company, Adoreboard, right? It's like, well, you're not measuring, you're not managing. And so there's lots of data out there, but if you're not truly utilizing that data, then you're not making an impact with it. So, and if you're not able to bring it together in a way that can, one of my other guiding principles is insights to drive impact. But back to well, you're not measuring, not managing, just truly having data-driven conversations is much easier conversation to have, especially when you think about customer health or insights about customers, or cross-departmental communication, or trying to drive change management, like having true data, a baseline of data to decide if it's good or bad, and then being able to see if you can actually, if you're driving change, if what you're doing is adding value or potentially decreasing value, right? So that's the core to me of building a scalable organization for post-sales and sales, post-sales, anywhere, right? My background was really more on operations side of things. So that's, to me, is data's king, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we often talk in our discussions about customer health, but you're thinking about the people and the processes and the systems that underpin that. How do you start to think about building out a measurement framework that touches on those key areas?
Sorry, the last part, how do
you think about that measurement piece that hits those key operating principles that you've articulated?
I mean, I go into the customer two ways. I look at it, the customer journey, but also even an employee journey, right? Like when you're onboarding an employee, I think about how do you measure that? How do you gather data and understand if what you're doing is improving or not? But from a customer journey standpoint, you think about the pre-sales journey, and then the post-sales, the onboarding, and the post-go live, and all the different parts of the journey. And then I also think about customer segmentation, right? So you look at it, the different pillars of the customer journey, and then by segmentation. So your self-serve type customers, which Alex is very familiar with, Zappos, a lot of more self-serve B2C, and then you've got your SMB and your mid-market and your enterprise and strategic. And each journey for each type of segment is going to be different. Maybe it's not hugely different, but the touch points are different. The health scoring is going to be different. All of those play a big factor, right? Self-serve onboarding is going to be different than a customer that's got a lot of professional services, for instance.
Yeah, and I think whilst we're talking B2B here, Alex, that's hit a big passion point for you, understanding your customers through data, but this idea of segmentation. We've had different contrasting views of that, but I think what we're hearing here is that segmentation is key in using data to do that. So maybe to get your reflection on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it is absolutely key. And Bobby hit on this really important distinction of different business contexts. So the B2C business context is very different. If you're serving millions of customers, and Bobby, my background is in psychology. I have a degree in experimental social psychology, and my focus was individual differences. One of my focuses was individual differences, and you have to recognize that people are different, right? You have millions of people; they're going to be different. And the key is to, as I'm sure you are kind of subscribe to this idea, that it's really important to figure out what are the important variables on which you segment. And of course, B2B is very different. But yeah, that's exactly right. I think without understanding your customer base, you can go nowhere.
So I suppose the kind of taking that one step further, kind of customer health scores and thinking about how you think about future customer retention. How do you think about that, Bobby, in terms of this idea of back foot, flat foot, and front foot? How do you stay ahead of your customer? I love that analogy. It's stuck with me so clearly since we spoke in those early days, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, data helps you have that insight. Sometimes it's definitely perception and gut feel, but like ideally it's data, especially when you're talking about the tech touch, self-serve, and SMB where you don't have as many interactions. So you need to have that data. And just for the audience, like what I've explained to people to try to keep things at layman's terms, really simple terms. It's like when you're working with your customers, you're either on your toes and you're coming to them and you're proposing things to them and you're helping guide them on using your product or service in the best way you want, and maybe suggest other products and services. Or you can be flat-footed where they're having some questions and maybe some doubts, and you're still able to communicate with them. And then you can go into these conversations. It could be a support conversation. It could be a customer success manager going into a customer. It could be a phone call that a customer calls into your support team, and you can be stuck on your heels where they're just peppering you with questions, issues, and it's really hard to turn that around. So having data is also important, but also that human touch, right? So that's where the human touch, if it's an engagement, but even if it's not and it's all fully data, you can see based on negative CSATs or negative NPS or third-party postings of negative, posts on G2 or some of those types of platforms. And then if you have your systems in a good place where you can actually see that or they've opened up so many support tickets and they've had 7 bugs or whatever that is. So then you can approach that situation different. You don't want to go offering the customer to buy a new product if they've got a sub 1 issue that they're really trying to get resolved. So using that mix of data analysis on the customer level and human touch is, one of my other guiding principles is every touch point with a customer is an opportunity. And so really having that mindset of being able to turn a customer around, utilizing data. At one of my previous employers, we had a customer health scoring set up, and we saw it was one of the top 4 major US airlines. Their health score was not good. We hadn't had any new business with them for a while. They wouldn't take a call from sales. I got them to take a call with our customer success manager, put her on a plane, and got the account turned around. We listened to them and let them vent and figured out their problem. We're able to find a resolution. It wasn't a clean resolution, but we found a resolution. Within 6 months, they did a 7-figure deal with us. So that was a mix of the human touch and the data touch. And we were definitely walking into those meetings on our heels for quite a while. And by the end, we were on our toes, and they were asking us for best practices on how what we see in other of their competition and type of how they're using our platform. So turned it into being an advisor.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I think what we're getting from this conversation is a totally different paradigm, right? You're advising the organizations and helping organizations that ultimately impact millions of customers, like Twilio powers the world's communication, advising airlines that power, flights every day. And then obviously in Next, enabling technology through millions of cars and the touch points around that experience as well. But Alex, I love that idea of measuring the gap between the back foot and getting on the front foot. And that's where trust is ultimately built. And that's a great example we've just heard there. I just maybe just to get a reflection from you on that idea of the loyalty comes from how you respond, jumping on a plane, the deep listening from a customer perspective, and then doing good for the customer to then flip that relationship. Just to get your perspective on that theme of loyalty comes from when trust is broken often.
Yeah, and we've heard that from other guests before, Chris, but Bob, you mentioned something that you said is really profound, which is the need to balance data with the human touch. I mean, this is because data, if you base everything on data, you're in the realm of the physical sciences, right? You don't need human touch there. You don't need to interview the beam, how they feel. You just need to know their physical properties and so on, the numbers. But when you deal with people, trust is built within that balance of understanding them and talking to them and then using numbers. Because if you stick just to numbers and trust is not there and there are problems, you can't. I mean, as you mentioned, right? It's hard to get to that point of building trust and becoming a trusted advisor.
Yeah. One way I helped, solve this problem or challenge, we'll call it a challenge, was I built in a previous customer success platform. I built what we called a reverse CSAT. And so anybody that went into a meeting with the customer, whether it be an exec sponsor or a CSM, anything that was scheduled, after the meeting, the customer success platform sent a survey to the employees. and it was a reverse CSAT. How do you think this meeting went based on your agenda? Like, your agenda was to get them to do, you want to go on your toes. And so it was just a simple 1 to 5, and that helped us understand like the customer health, especially if you didn't have a lot of data and metrics on the customer. Maybe there's not a lot of usage, or in the consumption-based world, which some of my products that I've supported are, it's really tough because it's seasonal and it's not a traditional SaaS business, right? So, but being able to have that reverse CSAT, so anybody in that meeting can say, hey, this meeting went great, or yeah, this meeting did not go well, or yeah, we were flat-footed, right? We were flat-footed, that's okay, but you definitely, so that's where we're giving that voice of the customer through their account team. So a sales rep and a CSM or onboarding as well could do that right during the onboarding phase of a customer.
And I'm sure that you also included the why question, right? Because if you just have the 5-point scale, how did it go? 4.5, but it's the why question, and that's where you mentioned Chris's platform, a door board. That's where, for example, a door board would help is to, at scale, and now with AI, find out the root causes that are hidden in those comments. And people sometimes don't say it straight; they say it in roundabout ways. And really smart AI, like for example, a door board, will figure out what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's always a text box, and we ask if it's a negative one, why? So you're absolutely right.
Suppose that naturally leads on to your second principle, Bobby, which is all about employee success equals customer success. Could you maybe just give us a kind of decode that for us? Give us some example.
Yeah. I mean, setting your employees up, being able to really onboard quickly, get the employee in a good, happy place, make sure they have from day one. Actually, one of the first hires I made at Nextlane is somebody I've worked with in the past that does this employee onboarding, and we use data all the way through. But we have self-learning guided mixed with human touch of personal touch of onboarding buddy, but we measure it all the way with the self-paced training. Like, are they finishing their courses on time? We ask for surveys of the courses so we can understand if they got that, if they understood it. And then at the end of the employee journey, there's also a weekly report to the managers on how that employee is doing, if there's any areas for improvement, any concerns. And we measure that the whole way through. And then that's a basic red, yellow, green, but we have the measurements if they're achieving their goals. And then at the end, they do a graduation ceremony, basically, where they present to a small team on whatever their core role is, and that they're capable to go off and help customers. And then we have an onboarding survey to the employee and to get the feedback. So always, one of my other ones is progress over perfection. So at this point, we're getting something out and we're iterating on it and going to make improvements to it. But really, really think that cross-training and getting an employee to really understand not only their role, but the roles adjacent to them. Like, how is sales selling a product? So onboarding and customer success knows how to support it and vice versa, and really being able to drive customer success through employee success. So an employee that's happy and feels they have the tools they need to help their customers goes a long, long ways. I definitely have seen that, and it helps you with scale. And also, just even a lot of companies have multiple products and multiple sometimes acquisitions, so that cross training within organizations. So where I'm at now, there's 21 different products, and through a lot of them are through acquisition. So really being able to start cross-training will be key to scaling our business.
I saw Alex nod in strong agreement there about onboarding and trying to get that alignment between the characteristics of the employees to then match that through the customer success. Alex, certainly that's a big one for you and what you've observed.
For sure, and we started chit-chatting about Zappos and Tony Hsieh, and I learned so much from experiencing Zappos under his leadership, and that was one of his main principles: is employees come first, and then customers, and right. And this idea of, sometimes we talk a lot about data, but Tony didn't have a lot of data back then. He went by a vision, right, about employees first and customer service as a way to win, for example. So it is this balance, but I completely agree, and I observed it firsthand with a visionary leader like Tony.
Superb. And I think that then nicely leads us on to, once you've got your employees set up and we've got that alignment with your customers, it's using insight to drive impact, and certainly thinking about how do you elevate the role of Chief Customer Officer, linking the CX initiative to bottom line impact. Bobby, you're probably one of the very few people that kind of speaks this and bangs the mantra on linking the CX to bottom line impact. Could you maybe just chat more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey, of course, but even measuring, starting with, it starts, I think it starts up and kind of goes back down, but customer health scoring, churn predictions, and being able to identify accounts at risk, and building out a whole program around at-risk accounts and project managing those at risk with a probability, just like a CRM for sales. You build that with your phases. You do the same thing for at-risk accounts. Now that's more for your, managed accounts, but with your unmanaged accounts, being able to use the data to identify accounts that are struggling, opening too many support tickets, onboarding one support ticket at a time. What you build programs in place to help those customers, right? So it really depends back on the segment, right? But offering in support, if they're self-serve, and if they are self-serve, having a program where building out, say, a tech touch, digital touch and tech touch, one many-to-many CSM team that can work with the longer tail. So once you see that data, the insights, and you say, oh, they've opened up 7 support tickets in their first 30 days, let's reach out to them proactively and offer them you can either do it digital, like, hey, offer them an onboarding webinar, or a human touch and say, hey, let's grab a 30-minute consultation just to really turn that customer from a detractor to I guess an attractor. I'm trying to think of the word, but to turn them around. So you can do that any phase, right? That's easier to do at the enterprise and phase where you have a one-to-one human touch, but you've got to be able to build programs that you can do that at the digital touch as well, and identify, using that data to identify at-risk customers and build a repeatable, scalable program around it versus your typical fire drills, right? And so that's basically what I try to, most companies are in that phase, and then they have that big leaky bucket out the back door, and they don't understand what's going on with the SMB customers because you just have support on them, which totally understands. But if you can start pulling that data and then use that data back to product management and say, hey, we've interviewed this many customers through this program where we knew they were struggling, and here's the things they were struggling with. Hey, product, can we please fix these 3 things? And we think this will go a long way. Same with support, having a data analyst that can say, hey, here's the CSAT by product and for a customer within the first 30 days, the different phases of the customer journey, and being able to show bring that back to product and engineering to show insights to drive impact, basically. So
yes. And again, I see Alex not in agreement there, and I'll bring you in just a second, Alex. I suppose it's about prioritization, Bobby, because you can't fix everything. But I'm also hearing this shift from being tactical to more strategic, right? Which is taking a step back, being inquisitive with your customer to actually do some of that root cause analysis. And then you have to make that business case to the business to say, hey, we want to put engineering resource to fix that. I talk about revenue at risk. That's something we talked about actually this morning. Is that a different lens to view customer experience, to kind of start putting dollar numbers to help the C-level kind of get the grips with prioritization?
Absolutely. So we'll use the enterprise or mid-market managed accounts. So I've built out programs where you literally have the risk reason. So these at-risk project trackers, we'll call it, or at-risk reporting, and then you select it, and then you have the amount of money at risk. Some companies will tie it into the CRM, so you have their ARR or their MRR, and you can put that in. And then you also do a probability of, I keep it pretty basic, 25, 50, or 75% probability of churning. So then you can give that data to drive impact, right? Hey, here's all the customers in this region that are having problems with. It might be support, right? Long support times. It could be we're having too many outages. It can be so many things, right? Latency. So being able to bucket and categorize that, and here's the revenue at risk because of that.
Yeah, and that's a totally different language, Alex, from what people talk about NPS scores. That's the language that has dominated the area of customer experience. we're not losing the human by talking about the revenue at risk, but we're creating a win-win for both the company and the customer, right? Is that something you'd share as well?
Absolutely. I mean, look, companies are in business to make profit. This is their goal. So they're not in business to make customers happy. That's the reality. So you need to, really smart companies would generate a lot of revenue by making customers happy. But the bottom line is why companies exist and businesses exist. So absolutely. If you don't show the impact of customer sentiment on the bottom line, you're not gonna those programs are not gonna be successful. And I'm sure Bobby has had experience with that over the years.
I learned the hard one. Just coming in with like, this is on fire and nobody's happy. Like, well, how many's nobody, right? Like, why is our still growing? Why are we still growing if everybody's unhappy, right? So I definitely got numerous times in board meetings and meetings with C-levels over the years, like, we need data. We need to give us real facts, right? So definitely did not know this stuff day one. And that's why I was happy to meet with Chris and other leaders to really help share my experiences so people don't have to go through it the same way I did.
Yeah, and you've helped us out so much, Bobby. So thank you so much for that. For them to kind of, I suppose, go on to principle number 4, which is every touch point with the customer is an opportunity, kind of speaks to customer journey. So maybe we could talk about customer journey. And then what does that actually mean for a company that operates with millions of customers and viewing the customer as a number versus that opportunity to give an act of courtesy that'll make the customer's day or do some small act that really has an impact. Could you maybe chat us through that first?
That's a tough one. To be honest, it's a little bit more of I do truly believe in it, but it's also something I try to instill in my employees as well to really like think. So they're thinking about that, like, hey, turn it around. Like, yes, the customer's unhappy, but what can you do to get that quick win? What can you do to like show them you have empathy or what can you do to like, how can we enhance that? Give them better support responses, but better regular updates. So it's what can you do? I just wanted that's a mentality of you try to think and put yourself in the customer's shoes. But going back to your real heart of your question, yes, it's during the customer journey, what the different touch points and having those listed out on where you can add that value and think about these opportunities. And the opportunities might not be sales opportunities. It might be trust opportunities as you're like building that level of trust, building that advisory level, bringing in a executive, bringing in a subject matter expert. You're building those trusts. So in the customer success world, which is very passionate to me, I always try to ask the CSMs, don't come like asking the customer a bunch of questions and just having a meeting to have a meeting. How can you come to them with a gift? How can you come to them with something of value to them? And then in return, guess what? They're going to open up. They're going to tell you things. Because you're, at the end of the day, as CSM's role is to make them look good to their boss for buying and using the product, right? It's that simple. So how are you going to come to them? How are you going to show them a new feature, a new functionality? It doesn't have to be something you're selling. It could be something like, or identifying data trends through the product if you can. What are those key things where you can come to them with a gift? And a simple one is we're building out support services plans and packages with, like, say, annual training hours. Like, hey, this is a great key for a customer success manager or a sales rep. Like, they already bought it, or we gave it to them as part of their package, but now you can go and remind them, hey, we have these training hours. How can we get that scheduled for you? What topics would you like to get trained on? And that's about building that trust and that camaraderie that is the partnership and not just the back on your heels, the customer peppering you with issues. Like, carve out, here's the things we're doing on the roadmap to help you. That level of trust and taking these opportunities.
Superb. So much to impact there, Alex, right? Maybe just
a really, really profound insight there, Bobby. I mean, it's what I took from what you're saying is that it's about the little things, right? It's many times, Rory Sutherland, who I really admire, he has this talk about usually executives tackle the big issues and they think that those need big budgets, and it's not the case. It's these little moments where you are generous, right? You as you said, you bring a gift, but you try to empathize, you ask them and listen as a human. I think that's where it's at. I think the world famous Zappos customer service that Tony used to build a company. It was about building human connection, building empathy, and so on. But we did pretty extensive research into what really drives customer satisfaction, and there were two small things. And it was first was saying, "I'm sorry." You don't blame UPS, you don't blame anyone else. Say, "I'm sorry that the shoes did not arrive." And secondly, "I'll fix it for you." These two things, right? And if you, like you said, you start with saying, "Oh, you know what, it was UPS," or "It's your fault," right? Implying, then trust is gone.
Yep, absolutely.
I love that. And I think it's partly maybe talking about the company culture that gives permission for to give the gift, right? Most depending on the culture, it's the gift is time and can be equal to expense. So that kind of tells me that the companies you've worked for, Bobby, have had good cultures that give that freedom for the team members to even think and process, what are we going to do for the customer today?
It's been a mind shift at some companies. Some already had it when I got there, and some I learned some of that from. But like some of it's a total mind shift, and like even talking to leadership around that. Like, yes, we want to get support tickets done in X number of minutes, but you know what? There's times where you want to take that extra time. There's time where you want to offer to have the customer a webinar or a Zoom meeting, a Zoom call to show them, even though they don't have that level of support, or is that taking that extra. And I think it just goes a long ways to winning trust, So yeah, definitely instilling that and making sure that you empower your employees. Back to employee success equals customer success. Empower them to do the right thing, but set the framework for them to know that that's available and that we want them to do it, right? So yeah, it's definitely a cultural thing from day one in day zero when you're hiring the right people and asking the right questions around empathy and customer values and what drives them when helping customers. So yeah.
Yeah, it almost also feels like a bit of a philosophy as well, because some of these things are counterintuitive. Why would you do that? Well, actually, we're doing right by the customer, and that kind of, it's partly a personal kind of value as well, right? To want to help other people. So I suppose I've heard that from Zappos, that they allow people to leave and actually pay them to leave if they're not a good fit for the culture. So it kind of feels that, to your second point, the employee success is really underpinning that other principle as well. So we can't all be Apple and the famous Zappos and everyone else. How do we achieve progress over perfection? Because that's your principle number 5.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different context, I would say. For me, it's getting something out there and iterating on it. So like don't take forever to get something out there. Like if everybody's empowered and enabled to know that, hey, let's get something out there sooner than later, we'll iterate on it. The Kaizen methodology, where you get something out, you pause, you look at some data, you pause and you reflect, and then you move forward. And if everybody's empowered to work in that type of environment, then you don't have any finger pointing. And it's like, so that's really more my thoughts on this is like, hey, we see a problem. Let's not wait to build a huge process around it and systems and tools. And how can we come up with something and iterate on it and then build a process around it and then build a system into it, right? So you don't try to create the whole thing day one. And like, maybe it's even sampling it on a few customers and then making progress on improving it, but then before going live. So I just have seen so many companies, especially in today's world with AI, like I was doing this for a long time, but AI is enhancing or accelerating that. It's like, if you tried to build some process and it takes you 4 months on making it up, but like somebody else is doing it in like a day, right? And you got to find that balance so you're not having a poor customer experience and a lot of flailing with the employees, but finding that balance of, hey, everybody, let's spend some time, think about it, get something out there, iterate on it, versus having to have something perfect and beating some environment companies' culture is that, why are you coming to this meeting without having every detail thought about it? And they'll beat up somebody about it or have a million questions. Like, no, we're going to get this out there. We want to do it a collaborative way and look at, like I said, look at the data and see how it can be improved.
It resonates with me, because if you invite the customer into the problem, where you're taking this agile collaborative approach, that builds trust as well. If they see you, going back to your point, even in a crisis going on, your front foot is more welcome than what appears to be back foot, but you're creating this beautiful system in the background. To your point, 4 months later, it doesn't really matter, So I think that's, I suppose, in this environment, Alex, that's, I suppose, a really important principle to think about when it comes to customer experience, doing right quickly.
Absolutely, and balancing it. And just we've seen companies in the past advocate move fast and break things, and then later on it kind of comes to bite you. And so it is everything that I'm a believer in moderation and balance. And so if you do it right, for different companies it's going to be different, but absolutely, just we're in this era of empiricism, right? Everything is like, how do you know? And try it and show me data and show me evidence, which is great. But again, if we've seen leaders being very successful based on vision, so it's how you balance those things.
I completely agree. You don't want to do it at the expense of a customer or a lot of customers where you're doing that. So I would do it less in context of building a platform or building a SaaS tool, but more about you see a problem, let's go out and build a product quickly. Identify and make some changes so we can help the customer or help the team or scale things. So definitely different context. I wouldn't go and change the whole UI on 10,000 customers or 100,000 customers and not take the time to document it or inform them. But at the same time, how can you make some changes? Like I said, progress. Do a quick change, fix something, iterate on it.
Superb. And that kind of neatly ties us into the final principle, which is happy customers who recognize value will naturally expand. And I just love that idea of value building and value exchange, and actually goes back to your other point about, doing things for the customer. So tell us about getting to value quickly, right? So how do you get the customer to realize value, but then how does that then flip once they realize value to expanding the relationship?
Yeah. I mean, this one I instilled more on originally was more on the onboarding and the importance of customer onboarding and helping a customer get up and running. But I think it's all the time, but time to first value is some measurement I always do. And I actually do it for the employee onboarding as well. Like when we instill the onboarding program for an employee, what's the date what's the time to first value? When are they able to do their first support ticket? When are they able to have their first customer engagement? How can we measure that, and how can we ultimately improve it, but without having a bad experience for anybody? But back to the customers, if they see the value, they're going to expand. They're going to prioritize that product or onboarding and prioritize your product over the customers have hundreds of vendors. And why should they continue on an onboarding that's 6 months in or 9 months in and they're not seeing the value yet? So try to get that quick win, back to progress over perfection, get something out there, show them the value, you let them see the value, celebrate that win, celebrate, where you're at, and then go, okay, here's next, right? Here's what we're going to do next. And after that, here's what we're going to do. And then get them excited about that.
Yeah. I suppose the flip of that, Bobby, is that you've observed that if you don't give them, if there's a long time to value, that kind of relationship decays over time, right? Is that your observation?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I've done some advising to some companies recently that was very much the case, and it was very painful. And the customers stopped engaging. They actually wanted to put projects on hold because they were limited in resources, and they said, "Hey, we're not seeing the value. It's been 6 months. We're putting this on hold. We'll come back to it, but we need to, with our limited internal resources, we're going to focus on things we can get to see the value in." So I've seen this way too many times, but it definitely recently with a CEO that I've done some consulting to, this has been a challenge for them.
So how do you think about the different ways to think about that value? Because the value has to exist outside of the product, right? It's not the fact that you've created the onboarding, right? That's not value. It's the value that enables. How do you get people to think about different types of value, or what's the North Star when you think about value creation?
Part of it is to understand why the customer bought the product, right? So why did they buy the product? What good looked to them? What are the milestones? So building milestones and and really aligning with the customer. Sometimes they say we want it all, and then you have to reset their expectations, say, hey, yes, but we're going to get it all, but like, what's the first thing you need to see, right? Like, what's the first, sometimes it's as much as just, here's the platform, here's your account. We've loaded some data in it, like you can play around. So sometimes, and if they, from an Adobe board standpoint, maybe it's you've gotten some customer data in here. Maybe it's one survey, one type of survey, and they can see it and start to visualize it and ask questions. So that's like time to first value, I would say, in your world, like getting that user set up and letting them see the power of the platform. Other companies, it'd be sending SMS. It's like you sent your first 100 SMS. Like one test SMS might not be good enough. You've now sent 100 SMS and like it's working. It scales from there. And after that, it can be hockey stick growth, right? And in the scaling world, in the API business. So it depends on the product and what the customer is trying to achieve. It could be launching something in a certain country, right? Like let's get that first country up and running, and then we'll go to the next country. So it really depends on the product and what the customer is expecting.
Super. And I suppose part of that then is enabling them to communicate value, and you see how products send you those emails. Thank you for, you've used the product X amount of times. Tell us about how do you set up for value acknowledgement, value being spread throughout the organization?
Yeah. Once again, totally depends on the product and the type of product and the customer, but the in-app messaging, which you talked about, emails that go in, but also if you're doing, say, an enterprise onboarding, like at certain milestones, celebrating that. I've had it where we send hats or kind of like swag to like really celebrate it. So it really depends, once again, back to the customer journey. SMB, tech touch customer, it's something you want to do an app or send an email that triggers through a customer success platform or a marketing platform, all the way to you go and have a team dinner. So like even for the time to first value. So it really depends on the product and the segment of the customer. But
yeah, I've seen that.
Celebrate it.
I've seen that even with employees. Alex, you spent some time in Zappos, and I would have seen some of the gifts you would have got over the years to kind of recognize the value created through team members, right? So it's not just customers, it's going back to that idea of employee drives better customer experience.
Yeah, employees, the whole ecosystem, employees, partners, right? When a company depends on, so back in the day with Zappos, it was vendors. It was actually those parties, Bobby, that we talked about, they were not called the employee party, they were called the Zappos vendor party, acknowledging that without the vendors, Zappos wouldn't have a business. So it's really these very sometimes counterintuitive ways of framing things, but it's everybody who you deal with, essentially.
Absolutely. At Twilio, they would send out a picture when an employee graduated or finished their onboarding, and it was a picture of the person's face on a training wheel, like they're training on a little kid's bike kind of thing. They're getting their training wheels off, basically. So just having fun and gamifying it a little bit and showing people, having some internal, like, hey, you're top 10 or top 5 or whatever it is, right? Like whatever fits for your business or your employees to really gamify and celebrate the wins.
Yeah, and there's some amazing kind of inspiration examples out there, Whoop or Apple Watch, where you're counting your steps or whatever. So there's so many good examples where you can kind of relate to and then bringing it back to your world. So I suppose we're at that point where we've talked through, maybe just a recap on, Bobby, from your perspective, the 3 kind of vectors, if we maybe just focus on that for a second. And then these underpinning principles that help you with those guiding principles. So if we maybe go back to those 3 key areas, and from our discussion, is there any key points that you would make towards each of those elements as we've gone through the 6 principles?
Yeah, I mean, they rely on each other, but people, process, and systems, right? So you got to set your people up for success. You need to be able to measure things to make sure you have enough people, right? Or you don't want to have too many, right? So really having the capacity planning and management. So, but setting your people up for success, hiring the right type of people, making sure they're onboarded. And then the processes is have the right process in place. Progress over perfection, get something out, iterate on it. Know that a process today isn't the process tomorrow. When you're at 100 million, the process it's going to be much different when you're at 300 or 500 million, same as 5 million to 10 million. So you always have to be thinking about, is this process working for us today? and how can we change, how do we improve it, right? How do we improve the customer experience through these processes? Training is a process to me. Like, so I think about how we improve our training and make that part of the whole, like the whole process, right? Like a ready to operate when a new product's coming out or a new feature or a new, how do we make sure that's part of the employee enablement and customer communication is a part of that. And then, systems is like, without having the right data in place and then being able to tie your customer data together, how are you managing it, right? Even you can have all the data you want, but if you're not able to get that data quickly and to drive insight, to drive impact, right? So back to one of the guiding principles. So they all align, and they all, every time I think about something, it usually falls into these categories. So I somehow need to have the guiding principles overlay to the pillars of the 3 pillars, but I haven't figured out how to do that just yet. It's in my head.
No, and we were making those connections, Bobby, as you were chatting. So thank you so much. I suppose, Alex, just a reflection from you, like customer experience tends to over-index in B2C. So this has been a kind of new paradigm for us to look through, particularly around trust and some of the kind of key reflections. Is there any questions that we should maybe wrap up on to kind of get some final thoughts as you start to think about this relationship between the B2B and the B2C customer experience and how you build trust?
Absolutely. No, this was really a great education, Bobby. And I mean, dealing with customer success and customer experience in the B2B world is more difficult in a way, right? Because it's more complex. We have different players, we have different mindsets, and you obviously have tremendous experience, and that everything you said makes perfect sense. And if you're struggling to figure out how these things, just give it to ChatGPT. It's gonna give you back the answer in like a few seconds. But no, this was great. I don't have any other questions or any other points.
Superb. So just to kind of recap, we covered the 3 vectors of people, process, and systems. We then looked at the underpinning 6 kind of guiding thoughts that give you a reminder as you're working through improving the relationship and growing your customer base. So Bobby, thank you so much for taking time to share your knowledge. I'm going to post your 6 principles now. It'll be Bobby's 6 principles that we're going to be talking about. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. I truly value that, and I know our audience will as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and happy to share ever again. And I love helping people scale their businesses and helping them help their customers. So
superb. Well, that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for this episode of Trust Builders. We'll see you again in our next episode, and stay tuned for announcements for our upcoming speaker. Thanks again now. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Trust Builders podcast, brought to you by Adoreboard.